do is record something that doesn't suck. To start recording at like 7 a.m. so we're a little less cynical.
Funny is usually harder.
Funny's way harder. Video works, audio works.
It's $3,500 chair.
Woo!
Hello, and you are listening to the Think Big and Code Small podcast. My name is Dan Horton, and I am joined with my friend and co-host, Chris Westerhold. This episode is sponsored by Code Crafters.
Welcome to another episode where Chris and I dive deep into the difference between the science of project delivery and the art of project leadership. Over 70% of technology projects fail to achieve their goals. Even today, this is a real problem. So the question is, what does it take to steer a multi-year project or initiative to success? But it's not leadership as you think it is defined. We're discussing how running a project should be more like a startup, and the leaders of the project should be more like an executive team. We explore how having a clear vision, a strategy, effective communication, and stakeholder engagement will pave the way to a more successful project. That it's not just about the science of how we deliver a project. It's about mastering the art of balancing both the process and the human touch or the human interactions.
It's going to be a good show. Let's get on it.
And been just fine, but no. Didn't hit record. Didn't, don't pass go. Don't collect $200 and go directly to jail.
It's easy to cut everything out. So just hit record and off we go.
But I'm trying to save the electrons, man.
Well, I know. But it's not like old film, right? My old film cameras, I had to pay attention to what I took a picture of, right? Because it was expensive to, go and get the film processed. So I remember going on vacation and having 8 rolls of film. And 8 rolls of film was going to cost me a couple $100 at the end of the day to process.
Yeah.
I feel like it was $500 in processing a film at one point from a vacation. And it's how I made the argument to buy a digital camera. I'm like, it's half the cost of the digital camera. In a year to 2 years, it's going to pay for itself. Like, why am I paying for all this film processing?
Well, and now there's, you have like the nostalgia of everybody going back to wanting to do film. Yeah. Because there's just, it's just different. It has a different feel to it, a different look to it. You have to think about it more to the point you were just trying to make instead of just, I snapped 400 things on my DSLR. Like, no, you need to think about it and really compose the image and not just snap until you find something that just happened to be good. And I think that's a really, interesting kind of, change in the landscape. Yeah.
I think it's better to put boundaries on the photography event that you want to do than to try to go back to film or something else. Because there's some really cool things you can do with film. Most of it you can repeat now digitally, like you can recreate it digitally. But if I go out and do a photo shoot, let's say I want to go take pictures of New York City for a little while, I could say I'm only going to have 36 shots. I only brought 1 roll of film. I got 36 shots. I need to make them count. Then you're going to be creative. But if you follow most of the old school photographers, they tell you anyway, pick a theme, pick something you're looking for. Like one of the guys I'm thinking of that's a New York City street photographer used to say, find a spot, sit and wait, and the picture will come to you. And so if you follow those models, you're still going to relax. You're still going to enjoy yourself. And you're also not taking 1,000 shots because nobody goes back and looks at those 1,000 shots anyway.
Well, and I think this actually, there's a lot of correlation here to kind of the topic of the day, believe it or not. When you think about the kind of art of like managing projects, whether it's in IT or other things, but, there's the I'm going to take 1 million shots from a DSLR. Then there's also like planning to use kind of the, traditional film. And, there's also kind of a middle ground of like, you can do all of that planning, but in the end, is your shot going to work out? You kind of have to try. But then there's the art of it. There's the science of it. There's a whole bunch of different things around, being a good photographer or around delivering a decent project. Yeah. And if that's not a segue, I don't know what is.
I was just thinking, I'm like, that was a good try. We're going to keep that one because that was a good roundabout.
I dug deep for that one.
Yeah. But it's a good, as you come around to that, because you and I have been talking about it probably a couple weeks now. And it's a topic that's been around forever. I happened to come across a PDF that was from McKinsey for the construction industry that was talking about the fact that leadership is needed on very large scale projects where smaller projects you might be able to run on, like you said, the science of project delivery. But this is the art of leadership of large projects. So they're two different things that kind of work together. It was a really cool document, 70 something pages to read, but it was a good report. I appreciate when they put pages in there that are just pictures. Speed it up a little.
I mean, why couldn't the whole thing just be pictures and I can really then just blast through it?
Right. Like a kid's cartoon book. Sure.
But I think it tells a lot of really, like, there's a lot of really interesting insights in there about, process. You can build and create process. And people can go execute that process. It doesn't mean that you're actually going to be successful because, no matter how hard you try to funnel things through a process, there is always going to be outliers. There's always going to be change, and there's always going to be something there to screw it all up. And it's, to me, it's how do you actually recover from those changes is the art that comes along with it.
Planning ahead, managing them, all of that. Yeah, I agree. I think what I found interesting in this is the fact that they call out that 5% of 500 global projects that they went and reviewed were successful. Only 5% of the 500. And the average project they were looking at was 37% over time or over budget. So on average, it was that. And then we know if we look at IT is still running that way today, where approximately about 70% of IT projects are failing. Yeah. And yet every conversation we have about a project that's maybe doing well, not doing well, whatever else, every project we talk to someone about, they go, oh, we just need to add more metrics, or we just need to, add more oversight. Like, we need more project managers. We need to go agile. We need more stand-ups. It's always ceremonies or reports.
It's more process
data at a very low level.
Yeah, it's more process, whatever that process might be. And I think another interesting overlay between them is in the construction industry, all of those projects got done. They didn't,
at some point,
they didn't just stop. Like, they might have been close to 40% over budget, but they got completed. A lot of the IT projects literally never get completed. They fail. And I've been talking to a company recently that they've tried to do a DevX journey twice and it's failed, and where they just completely stopped, and now they're trying it again for a third time. And so failure in the IT industry is a little bit different than in the construction industry,
right? Because you're not going to leave a half-done building or a half-done bridge in the middle of a city somewhere, right? They have to finish it.
You wouldn't think so. Looking at Jetta Tower, that's been half built for like 5 years now. They think they're actually getting ready to start it again. But I mean, there is some very, kind of large mega projects that have kind of, been doomed from the beginning almost.
Yeah. And I think that's why they did this report, is because there are projects that seem to go on forever. And it's, why is that project going on forever? And I think it was interesting as you read through it to see what they called out clearly was the fact that at a certain point, a project can no longer effectively be run only on the principles and practices right, that we do as what we call the science of project management, they called it, right? So the systems, the processes, the methodology we follow, whether waterfall, whether agile, all of that only works to a certain point. And not that it fails, but then there's more things that are required to effectively work in the complexities of the project, because as we scale, it gets more complex, right?
Yeah. And it's, whether you can have really solid process, but it's how do you, again, react when things go wrong is the art that you really need to be considering. And, if you think about these kind of mega projects in the construction industry or, transformation projects in IT, they're multi-year projects. Like in the past, we've talked about, kind of legacy modernization and those kinds of things. And if you have 100,000, 300,000 lines of COBOL code, like you're not going to get that fixed in 6 months. That's going to be a 2 or 3 year project or more. It could be a 10-year project. Who knows? And so, the assumptions you had up front are not going to be the same assumptions you have halfway through the project or 3/4 of the way through the project.
Right.
And so how do you actually go about mitigating and changing that risk is, I think leans into the art of things and less from the science.
Yeah. And I think that's where some of the observations they had and some of the things we've seen throughout even our own careers is larger multi-year projects require more people. They have more vendors. They have more internal teams, right? More departments that get involved. Even the complexities of smaller projects between the business and IT, as I think of this, right? Even that complexity of the business side against the IT side, which we've seen forever, that falls into this model too, because it requires more. It requires bringing more people along, not technology. It's not simple process, right? Again, it goes back to, like you said, that art. It's what does it mean? And I think the definition they had, which was interesting. So what I looked up was McKinsey emphasized that the skill for project managers is acquired throughout their careers, right? They learn this through books like PMBOK and everything else. You can go get formally trained. You can learn all the skills you need to deliver this and be very good at it. Organizations, whether internal or consulting, that do this are very good because they put practices and methodologies in place and follow them. Then at one point you say, okay, what they're not seeing is the art of project leadership. And one of the reasons it's not there is because they don't learn that in school. They don't learn it in the PMBOK. They don't learn it in online training. Like even I did a search quick before we talked.
Yeah.
The search for the art of project management, in the way I searched for it, I only found the same McKinsey report. There was really nothing else out there. And what that means is basically learning how to effectively deliver these larger projects requires trial and error or a coach, right? So if you and I are working together and I know how to do it well, or you know how to do it well, we could teach each other. But if I happen to be on a large project and no one's done it before, we're almost destined to fail because there's that unknown factor, right?
Well, experience is non-transferable, just like respect or any of these other things. Like it's non-transferable,
right.
And you can't read it from a book. You can't do it. It takes you actually going through it, and you can learn from people's experiences by reading about them and what they had. But no book could ever be long enough to truly describe the problems in which you're having. And, to jump into, back into the IT space for a second, in a lot of major transformation projects, there's a significant number of business folks that are probably against doing whatever you're wanting to do. They don't see a lot of value in it. They don't know what COBOL is. They don't care. They know that when they go and do these things, it does what they want it to do. And now you're asking them to completely change it, to run all of this risk to put them at risk in front of their clients. They're going to be the ones taking the bullet when things go wrong. And now all of a sudden, like, why would I want to do this? No. And, there is no process that will help you solve that problem. It is all about, going through and doing this before and being able to describe and show that value and build collaboration and, set a better vision for the future and all kinds of things.
Yep. 100%. Because it's not, if it was that consistent and that repeatable, then we wouldn't see all these problems in the industry, in all the industries, because we're talking about tech and we mentioned the report that's from construction, but you can take this across any project anywhere and it's the same thing. It's the mix of the other triangle thing we have, right? People, process, and tech.
That's right.
Like you need to take all of it into account. And this part takes more of the people side of it, not the process side.
Well, and so straight out of this article, they talk about these 10 kind of serious issues that come up when they're talking about these large kind of projects. And the first one is poor vision and strategy alignment. Gee, I've never heard that before in an IT scenario. And if you're trying to do a large transformation project and you can't very quickly and easily describe the strategy of what you're trying to accomplish, you're dead from step one. And
100%.
I know I bag on lift and shift stuff all the time, but I'm going to do it again. Like if you're trying to tell me that we're going to take this mess from this one location and we're going to just move it to this other location and it's going to cost me $1 million or however much. No, the answer is no. There is all risk and no reward. So what you're telling me is it's not going to be any better. It's just going to move from an on-prem location to a cloud location. No, thank you. And
no added value.
In almost every scenario that I've ever seen when it comes to those things, there is no vision. There is no strategy. It's just, and y'all can't see my air quotes, want to move to cloud.
Yes. And well, that's what the strategy becomes. Strategy, it becomes folks. It becomes a technical strategy. Somebody said, go to the cloud. Okay.
Okay, let's go to the cloud.
Yeah. And you've heard of me for that scenario. You've heard me say many times, I think the mainframes are still more powerful than the cloud sometimes. And people underestimate those machines for certain scenarios. So like moving to the cloud and that kind of headache, I agree with you. It's not always the best choice.
But, I'll throw these next kind of 3 in this list together, but ineffective communication, inadequate risk management, and lack of stakeholder engagement.
Yep.
And, all of that is building a coalition and getting, if you get one right, those next 3 are really the implementation and getting people on board with your vision and strategy. And if you don't have a vision and strategy, you tend to hide in the bushes you don't want to talk to anybody because you can't convince them. So then these other things start to now pop up of, if you can't adequately describe what you're actually trying to accomplish, you can't really come up with good risk management strategies. You're not going to have engaged stakeholders. You're not going to have clear communication because you don't know what you're trying to do in the first place.
I think you find where I see this happening is you'll see people where all of these questions get answered in the streams of work. They're at a very low level.
Yeah.
So you're not talking about the program that we're working on building. And I don't mean program physically as in like a software application. It could be anything, but the program of work we're working on, there's an outcome we're driving towards. And you don't see the conversation at a high level. You'll see it in a very low level. And then also because of that, I think that drives the fear of more risk, hidden issues, hidden problems. So then what you see is a lot of other leaders now questioning and being concerned about the project when they don't need to be yet. But because of that lack of communication, the lack of clarity, they get engaged in the wrong way. So we don't end up with a lack of engagement from stakeholders possibly. We get too much and in the wrong way because we're not managing it correctly.
Well, I think that overlays into the next one, which is kind of unexpected. Let me try that again. Unrealistic expectations and scope creep. So in a vacuum, if people will fill that vacuum with something. And so if you're trying to conduct a project and the strategy and vision around that product or project or program or whatever word we want to use is lacking, you will get people to fill it with what they want it to be.
Yes.
And now all of a sudden you have many different variants of what this project actually could or should do. And now you're setting people up to be real disappointed when, you do this project and all of a sudden it doesn't make them, coffee and tea in the morning. It's like, well, That was never a part of this. Like, how did you get that idea that this thing was going to do that for you? And now all of a sudden there is a whole nother layer of risk management there that you now have to fight. So instead of setting that strategy up front, you now have let other people set your strategy. Now you're having to fight back against what they get wrong compared to what you had in your head. And if you would have just been out there in front telling people what it is, you wouldn't have to fight that battle in the first place.
Yeah. The clarity of the project itself will manage the scope of the project, at least more so because people will understand. But it requires the leader to, one, which we fail here often, truly understand what the outcome is and what's happening on the project. So are the leaders of the project getting enough information to truly know what they're building? And then the second is the ability to cheerlead it. So are you being a cheerleader for this project? Are you consistently communicating what's happening, why we're building it, what good looks like, what the outcome is going to look like, what value is going to be run from this, and then also managing with risks and the rest of the stuff. But are you pushing that and being that single unified voice, right? The loudest voice in the room, keeping everybody focused.
Well, and
that doesn't happen often.
If you go and ask a group of 5 people what they want to go eat for dinner, you're going to get 6 answers, maybe 8. But if you went to that same group and said, hey, everybody, I've got this really great restaurant that I think is super fantastic, and I've eaten there a bunch of times, and it's got a really great thing that everybody's going to love, people will probably agree with that pretty quickly. And so this goes into just being a good leader. By being a good leader and being that front face and being able to answer the questions and have things well thought through, it's going to be way easier for you. Yet a lot of people won't or can't do that. And it's surprising to me.
Yeah, there's a slight variation in not what you said, but in adding to that I want to pull out. And that's that it's not that the person leading has to make all the decisions, or that person leading is driving the final design, or it's not that. We're not saying that they're all of a sudden a single point of everything. We're saying is, as the team is working and designing and defining and building what we're building, they're helping to, like I said, cheerlead, to get that communication out, like you said, provide the clarity and the focus. So when everybody else's head's in the weeds, they're still looking up at the forest. They're looking a little far ahead. It's the captain on the ship looking out and going, hey, look, iceberg. It's somebody helping,
Well, they're that one to be that final arbiter of, this is the direction we want to move in. This is the that's our North Star. And they help with that decision making, because if you have multiple work streams, you can have competing priorities against them and being able to help kind of steer the ship in the right way. And, if you don't have that, this kind of leans into two other things on this list, low team morale and also inadequate resource allocation. And so if you don't have that kind of layer of leadership and you can't describe what you're doing, the whole team knows it. It is there. people are a lot smarter than a lot of people want to give them credit for, and they can sniff out a bad leader pretty quickly. And if you're not motivated, you're not bought into a problem, you're going to have lower team morale. You're going to get a little more snippy with everybody else. You're not going to get the help you need to, because no one can describe what you're actually trying to do. And it becomes this kind of, almost doom spiral of, there's no strategy. You have lack of team morale. You're not getting the resources you need. So then now you have that leader is now fighting all of the other people that want to set the strategy. So then they're spending less time on the actual project. You have lower team morale. It just becomes this downward spiral of problems. And, you would think that a lot of these projects would never get funded until some of this stuff was defined, but I don't see that as being a problem in a lot of places. That I've seen projects get funded that seemingly have one sentence defining what they're trying to be.
Yeah, and I think there's a fine line there too, because I've seen the same as you. I've seen that happen in many places, but I've also seen the other side where things never get started because people get into the analysis paralysis side of it, right? And you want me to write everything up and have everything so perfect. And this goes back to the 90s when we had to write, 120-page architecture documents to tell you everything we were going to build before we actually really knew what we were going to build. So everybody could think, because it was the idea. People thought that if I'm comfortable that you know what you're building because you've documented all of it, of course we're going to be on time and on budget because I've made you write it all up. I've made you document all of it, which is wrong too, because one has nothing to do with the other. It doesn't matter. Making people document more and process more and everything else doesn't work.
Well, and if you go back to that's the art. That's that to me feels like the direct, the line between the art and the science. Yeah. Because the science says if you go and document all of these things, it's going to be better for everyone. But the art says we know that's going to be wrong. A lot of that's going to be wrong. And finding the right line of needing to define this well enough to get this moving versus overanalyzing it. There is no book. There is no process. There is no formula that is going to say, aha, that is the exact place you need to stop. And now you can go ahead and kick this project off.
It takes being burnt on enough projects to realize the line that you've identified so that you can manage those. And that's the art. Like you said, the best to our analogy before, you said going to dinner, get a bunch of people, 5 people get 8 answers. That's great. There's a process in that. You're going to ask all your friends. You go through the list. Everybody kind of picks. Maybe you draw straws. Maybe you flip a poker chip. Maybe, we have poker chips. So you flip a chip. You pick it where you're going. There's a video I saw the other day. It was awesome. And the girlfriend gets in the car. And the guy learned the art of figuring out where we're going for dinner. So instead of asking his girlfriend, where do you want to eat dinner tonight? He goes, I bet you'll never guess where we're going tonight. And she goes, oh, we're going to go to the barbecue place. Or, oh, we're going to go here, right? And he goes, you figured it out. That was excellent. How did you know that?
You nailed it the first time. That's crazy.
I'm like, there's the art over the science, right? Mm-hmm. So there's the art of figuring out, how do I get my girlfriend or my wife to pick where we're going for dinner without me asking her, where does she want to eat? Like, okay, there you go.
Well, you also, know the people. And that's another thing the process can never tell you is, okay, well, I've worked with these types of people, or hope your girlfriend or your wife, but you've worked with these, you're back to the group of 5 friends. Like you've known them well enough to know what, oh, well, this one's a vegetarian. That one doesn't like Mexican food. This one likes Asian fusion, whatever. Like, right. And you know them well enough where you can anticipate what they might do and follow a good process as well. And that's where you can really just make things, and there's a level of trust there as well, where they trust you. Hey guys, like, I think this is the right decision for us. You in? Oh yeah, I believe you. Let's do it. Why not?
Right. And that's where I think the culture is very important here, where the non-science part of this, the art side of this, is looking at culture, but it's also looking at building high-performing teams. Because if I'm building out high performing teams and a better culture, things are naturally going to go better because, like you said, we trust each other. We have better communication practices with each other. Right. And so we do less formal documentation and less formal practices because we just kind of know how we work together.
Yeah.
We just get it done.
Well, and this is where one of my big problems with agile methodologies come in, is they try to lean in to all process and there's no real art to it. And, all right, Scrum Masters, go ahead and just like skip forward maybe 20, 30 seconds here. But you see this problem with a lot of Scrum Masters is they've gone through, they've, studied the Scrum guide and they've passed their Scrum test, but they have, as a person who likes to scroll through Reddit, I've seen more than a handful of them. I just passed my Scrum guide test, and I got hired as a Scrum Master. I don't know what I'm doing. And it's like, well, yeah, because you have zero experience. You don't know how an engineering team actually works. You don't know how software is actually created and when you should push harder and when you should back off. And there is no process that's going to help you there. And right. I've seen a lot of those folks. There's good ones. There is really good Scrum Masters, and then there's people that just try to do the process to over the process, and they, we just process. And it's like, guys, calm down. Like that, I understand that you want to do X, Y, and Z, but it might not be the right time. And, right. Building that level of experience is really, really key. And anybody that's never been in technology before, there's no way in hell you can be an efficient Scrum Master. Not that I think Scrum Masters are valuable in the first place, but that's a whole nother topic. Sorry, Scrum Masters.
Yeah, we can do a whole nother show on that one. And if we add in project managers for my same argument, we're good. Because I know my entire career, 3 project managers are outstanding. And the part that was different is they had more art than science, if we go based on this. They understood how to build software. They understand how to deal with the client. They've worked so many projects, they just kind of knew how to float around to work. So they were always out of the way of the technical teams to get things done. Yet they were always taking care of stuff ahead of the teams to get rid of any blockers and issues. And I'd have to say with the people I'm thinking of, all of our projects were successful and clients were ecstatic. Yeah. But that was such a small number of people because, like you said, most people get certified and they don't want to learn or they don't have the time to learn. Let's be fair, right? Maybe they don't have the time to learn. Mm-hmm. And what happens is now they go back to what they knew as the science in our conversation today. They went back to what the book says. So they're like, I have to have all of these documents. I have to have all of these practices in place and you must do them. So now they're pushing all the developers and they're pushing everybody else to spend all their time on these ceremonies and documents and outputs or whatever, right? Instead of actually building the product they're supposed to be building.
Yeah. Well, I'll look back at, one of the key things actually, let me state this first. The job that a Scrum Master is supposed to do is very important. I just don't think that it should be a standalone role. So there you go, Scrum Master people, take that. But
again, you and I talked about that earlier, so I think that's fair because we're not trying to we're calling out the roles in technology. We're not calling out the people.
Yes.
Because
that role is very valuable.
Right. But you and I talked, and we should come back to this on another one because you and I talked a bit earlier before we hit record because we're really bad at hitting record right away. And, we talked about the program architect that came up and like there's 10 different definitions for that role and where does that fit in? And you and I talked about project, program, product, and like all these titles. So instead of people fixing the problems with how we build software, instead of fixing the problems we're talking about today, it seems like people just keep adding these roles. We keep adding more people and adding roles, which then is never fixing the leadership side of this. It's just trying to continue to work on the process side of this.
Well, it adds a whole bunch of complexity. So if you have a tech lead, a Scrum Master, a product owner, and an engineering manager, the Venn diagram of those folks is going to have a significant amount of overlap.
100%.
And so how do you coordinate amongst those? And I've seen teams with all of these people, by the way. how do you coordinate amongst yourselves and figure out who's doing what, when, why, and where? And you waste a lot of time on that. And take something that a Scrum Master would say is definitely their job, removing impediments for an engineering team. Well, the product owner would say that that's their job. The engineering manager would say that that's their job. And the Scrum Master would say that that's their job. Well,
so it's tech lead.
And the tech lead would also say that, and so how, as a leader and trying to set the ways of working, who cares about the role titles? Figure out who's responsible for what, and then enable those people to be able to do it, instead of incentivizing those people to argue amongst themselves.
I think that the two things in there. One, I agree with you, definitely. But that I think is where some of the problem comes here too, is we think we need leadership, as we're saying, right? We're using that word without truly defining it completely. All of those roles you just said are some form of leadership inside this process. The difference being, what we're not being clear about, I think overall, is where that line is between what's actual product leadership that we're talking about, or project leadership that we're talking about, and product management. Because product management still covers all those roles we're saying. That is not product leadership, as we're saying, right? That is driving the streams of work and the physical deliverables and all those roles. And there are too many of them. I agree with you.
Well, there's, and so like, I guess let's describe these layers a little bit. So if you start from the bottom up, you have the folks that write code, and then there are the folks that help determine what code is being written. So that's where you would throw in the product managers and folks like that. Then there's a layer above that says, okay, well, what program or project are we doing? And, what is the outcome that we're trying to drive towards? Then there's another layer above that says, well, what initiative should we be actually doing as an engineering organization? And having leadership across all of those layers makes sense. But what you don't see, you'll see many people trying to fight for that layer of leadership over the actual Scrum teams themselves or engineering teams themselves. Like we were just talking about with Scrum Masters and tech leads and product owners and those kinds of things. Then at the layer above it, what is a program versus a project? Good luck.
Yeah.
And, how do you define that? And I think that, when I think of the art, of, driving a broader IT, transformation project, that's where leadership really falls apart, is that layer. And then there's even a layer more of that. That's not what the PDF was talking about from McKinsey. I think there's another layer off of that people internal to an organization don't have any skill sets because they see how they work in the org different than they should for some of the projects. From a consulting standpoint, it's a layer that's missed and often misunderstood on a lot of these large multi-year projects. And organizations that get it right help drive these projects to success. Ones that get it wrong are in the 70% that fail, right? They're in the big number that goes. And so I think there's another layer on top of even that layer you're saying. So there's building the streams of work and what we're working on, right? And inside that, we have the principles, we have the practices, the systems we follow, the overall methodologies of how we're building whatever we're building. Then there's a middle layer in there, like you said, which is for the project itself we're doing. Now I want to know, what am I building? So that would be the product. What does it look like holistically? How does it align to the business for value? And then what does that look like? So that helps to start defining what the goal is and the vision is, but it's still very tactical. It's still very much part of the project management, the building of it. Okay. Yeah.
The part that I liked here that gets called out that my own career, I think gets missed often, is now one level above that, which becomes very much an art. How do you manage the people? How do you manage the interactions? How do you manage communication and visibility? And there was an interesting part of the article where it talks about contractors and subcontractors that are on a project building a bridge are not your enemy. They're business partners, and you need to think of them as business partners because we're all in it together. Yet if you're on an IT project and you're working with 2 other consulting firms, you immediately look at them and go, oh, I can't work with those guys. That's my competitors or something else, instead of thinking of them as a partner in building out this solution. So this layer on top is changing the narrative for what we're building, whether it's that communication, whether it's that partnership, whether it's guiding and helping the organization to see it differently. Yeah, but everything they do is also an example that then trickles down, I think, into all the other layers and changes how everyone speaks and talks and works together, and then drives the projects to success.
I agree. You even see that looking across different kind of organizational silos as well. Oh, well, I'm in this group and they're in that group. Like, I don't need to work with them because I don't want to make them look good because my boss doesn't like their boss, or God knows what kind of internal politics are happening there. Right. But I think that layer you're describing is, it's truly the people that are defining the outcome, not the what are we actually doing and why. And a great example of that is I did a big kind of data platform project that what we put together was amazing. Honestly, it was really, really great. But no one inside of the organization cared. The leader that we were working with had a vision, and we built a really great product, but was not willing to bring the rest of the organization along. And in the end, it didn't have anything to do with how good or poorly the technical teams delivered. Everything worked the way that you would have expected to. It was great. But again, nobody cared. And the whole thing just got like, yeah, cool. All right. And it just sits on a shelf that is, oh, look at the great little widget I built. Right. And, will a lot of people look at that as a failed project? Maybe, depending on exactly how you want to think about it. But, it was delivered basically on time and on budget, but it's not actually, delivering any impact. And
right. It provided no value to the organization at the end of the day.
And so in the end, that to me felt like a leadership problem that, they had money and they had budget and they spent it, but it just didn't get anywhere. Yeah.
And one of the principles I pulled out of the writing that I wrote for myself was that the program leader needs to be a CEO, right? It's a C-suite that's going to help run the project. So it's top level leaders. It could be inside of an organization. It could be the director of that department. It could be a VP. It could be the actual C-suite. I mean, it depends. But the idea is not that they have that title, but they're acting in that way. So if they think about the program of work that they're building or working on as a startup, and now they're running their own startup. Now I need to think about this as, how do I run a business? And I need to treat this as I'm running a business. And that's why it's different than, like you said before, of even the leaders of the actual delivery are different than this set of roles. This set of roles is running a business. The next set of roles is helping drive a consistent vision of what we're building. They work together, but they're different. So the idea is that this leader or group of leaders needs to have a deep understanding of the project's context in relation to the overall business, a higher level business judgment. They have to have the ability to lead large and diverse teams, and then they need to have skills to maintain a trust-based relationship with the stakeholders, all of the team members, all the consultants we work with, and then be flexible enough to adapt to all the uncertainty that we know is going to happen during the whole thing. So they can't be locked into, it must be done this way, and this way, right? It's more of, it's got to be done this way and.
Well, and I look at it as kind of that executive sponsor, executive leader, right. To your point, whatever word you want to give them, but they're the person that in the end shouldn't care at all about the technology. or the how. The thing they should really only care about is the value that's being brought to the organization, ensuring that is realized, and which is a very, very different way of thinking about running a project. And, in a ton of organizations, you'll hear, oh, this is our executive sponsor. That's our executive sponsor. They don't talk about anything. They're not a part of anything. They haven't been a part of anything. And, people on the ground don't even know who they are.
Right.
And, that to me is where the biggest gap is on some of these things. And if they're not involved, that means they're not spreading the word from that kind of leadership level and business impact level. So then, whether it's a construction industry or a construction project or an IT project, that project is kind of doomed to fail from the beginning, because back to the example I gave a minute ago, even if you deliver that thing impeccably, no one might care.
Right. And are you able to get even the support you want? Because the support at that level is different than the support that I get if I'm just working on delivering a piece of code and I need security to go and, give me access to a new database or something. Like, they're very different things. At a large program level, you want me to help with things that are around, like I said, more running a business. If I think of it as a business, then I have stakeholder and I have partner management. Like you just said, I have community engagement. Mm-hmm. Am I cheerleading and communicating this out in a way that I'm getting backing from the organization? If it's a public project, am I making sure that everyone that publicly is watching the work we're doing on the same page, right? How many times do we see an article that's published from the CTO inside of a company talking about the great work they're doing, right? That's perfect. That's community management. So how am I doing community management? Am I thinking about larger governance? Am I thinking about finance and regulations at a higher level? How am I thinking about all of these other things? Another really interesting one, right? If you're doing a multi-year project for an organization, more from a consulting side, let's say, than internal, but it does work for both. What's my succession plans from a leadership side?
Yeah.
Because if this year's CTO or CEO is supporting the piece of work we're doing, and they're going to leave in the next year or two, how are we positioning to onboard and have the new CEO or CTO coming in be just as excited and support us going forward? Like, somebody needs to think of this, right? And then all the practices at a higher level, right? Really big projects can fail because we can't get the right resources. So is that leadership team working with your internal teams to make sure that you're staying far enough ahead, right, to have the practices in place again for building teams and managing teams and moving forward? So I think there's a lot of little things that have to happen on a program of work that at a tactile level, they work one way, but at a leadership oversight, they work different, and we miss those parts.
Yeah, I like the way you've described it as kind of being the CEO. But the thing I would add to that is, you can kind of look at it as being the CTO, but I like the idea of thinking about it as a startup, like you mentioned as well. And every startup has to find product market fit. And you don't find product market fit through like a hammer, essentially, by just telling everybody in an organization you have to use it. You generally have to go build consensus. You have to solve real problems. You have to do all of those kinds of things to deliver on that business impact. And, there's a lot of organizations that I've come across that don't prioritize business impact. They prioritize delivery of widgets. And that is, again, another failure at a higher level of like, okay, well, if the only thing I care about is you delivering widgets, then who cares if it has an impact on the business? And, leadership is such a key to all of these things, yet it seems to get missed so much. And, I guess I'm just taking shots at people today, but a lot of like middle management in IT is not filled with leaders. They're filled with good technologists that wanted a raise. And to get that raise, you had to get promoted. And it's why so many people in the technology, kind of management space end up going back to just being developers, because it's not their skill set. It's not the thing that they are interested in. And so they just go back. And so you find this, kind of gap in leadership, and also a gap in skill set. Being a technologist is great and you can build really cool things, but the minute that you have to start being, understanding the why and understanding the politics and understanding the change management and understanding the give and take of trying to get other people on board without, having any authority, can be a really big challenge.
I think there's a lot there to unpack on that one. I think I agree with everything you're saying. I think what comes out of it is the understanding that I think people get frustrated in all of these different roles because what we said earlier, they're not clearly defined. And there's a problem at a higher level, which is truly leading and guiding some of these teams in this piece of work. Everybody starts thinking their job is more than it is, or different than it is, or they need to take on more than they need to, thus causing more stress, thus destroying the culture, and then ruining the project. And then everybody wants to leave because everything sucks. And I think there's a lot to be said for clarity in that. And like you said, the ways of working and the roles themselves. If I'm coming on and I'm a scrum master or a project manager or someone else, I don't expect them to know the technology, nor do I want them to know that. That's the architects, that's the tech leads and the developers, right? That's their job. You should understand what they need to get their job done and then get out of their way. Your job is to go take care of making sure we're delivering and communicating what we're delivering. But what do we normally see? We see those roles fighting with each other on projects all the time.
Yeah.
Right? Instead of working together. And that's a lack of clarity of where people are adding value, because with a lack of clarity, people will try to find a way to add value because we all want to add value.
Well, it's
stepping on each other's toes.
It's a lack of clarity, and it's also a lack of trust. Where
it builds a lack of trust is what happens.
Yeah, because if you don't understand the role you're actually trying to play, then you start to step into those other areas. Then you start to butt heads. Now all of a sudden you don't trust each other. You don't anything. And now all of a sudden things are going to spiral quickly because now you can't even communicate. And instead of, taking like, hey guys, let's take a step back, understand ways of working. What are you going to do? What am I going to do? Like, and trying to reset that balance, you see people just argue and argue and argue, and then they'll fight against each other. And then all of a sudden now you've got a civil war going on between people across different projects. And it's like, guys, calm down. Like this is not the end of the world, please.
Yep. Yeah. No one's going to die over this. We're okay. Let's reset. And it's interesting because based on what we're talking about here, that middle layer of deliverable leadership will add more processes in place. They'll try to mitigate, most times, they'll try to mitigate by using practices and processes they know or something else, which doesn't solve the problem. But again, this is a lack of learning or teaching some of the skills you need to get through some of this. Well, but this is where this other leadership, like let's say group, should be able to step in and be a third party for the team to go, okay, I see everybody fighting with each other. Well, let's step back. Let's all get in a room and let's vent it out and let's figure out what's going on. So everybody realizes that we're actually on the same team and we don't need to kill each other. Like, so somebody needs to be that third party, and sometimes they are the right team to help.
Well, and I agree that that's the right thing to do, but I also see people screw that up where they come in and they're like, all right, children, sit down, shut the hell up. I'm in charge. And now they become the bottleneck. It's like, oh, well, okay, you two clearly can't get along. So I'm going to now play arbiter. And now I am in the middle of making all of these decisions when these folks should be able to do it themselves. And if in that conversation, if done right, it's like, hey, I can facilitate a conversation, but I am not going to lead this. You two are supposed to be leaders here, and I need you to act like leaders and play nice. Like, if I need to get involved, things aren't going to go well is how the conversation should go. But I see a lot of people, they just bring in trying to solve the problem, they take the burden on themselves.
Right.
And there's a really interesting quote here from a book, Team of Teams, which if you haven't read it, you should check it out. It's pretty good. But the quote is, "The temptation is to lead as a chess master, controlling each move of the organization. But you must give way to an approach as a gardener, enabling rather than directing. A gardening approach to leadership is anything but passive. The leader acts as an eyes-on, hands-off enabler who creates and maintains an ecosystem in which the organization operates." And
it's a good quote.
I think that really kind of overlays here, where it's like, I don't want to come in and be like, all right, guys, this is exactly what you should do. It's how do I help my leaders become better leaders so that they can now lead and guide without me, and then I can just help them course correct. And, so I've seen, I think we've all seen, leaders inside of an organization that are running around like a headless chicken. And a lot of that has to do with them taking on all of the problems instead of enabling people. And now they've become this gigantic bottleneck, and they're so busy they don't understand any context. And so now they're making, back to the thing we talked about earlier, poor decision making and all of these other things. And it's just this downward spiral. And, that being able to take that step back and say, I am not going to solve this problem for you. I will help enable you, but you need to be the one to do it. And that is going to either allow that person to grow or to fail. And there's consequences to both of those, positive and negative.
Yeah, I think so you remind me of situation recently, which was the same, which is the conversation is constantly like getting into conversations where people are like, are you going to own that? You're going to do that. Like, are you doing that? And it's like, well, no, we have a problem with something. I'm a leader. I'm going to come and facilitate these workshops with the teams of leaders to help them to get realigned back to lead. And it was extremely effective when I was done doing what I needed to do. Mm-hmm. But that didn't mean I took on their work. That doesn't mean that their work was now my responsibility. My name didn't get put on the tasks. That's not my job. My job is to take over almost 30 years of doing this and say, okay, I've seen where this is going to fail. I'm going to help you before you put your foot in that hole. And you're going to trip. So let's do that. And together, we're going to do this together. And here I am to help. But it doesn't mean when I leave tomorrow, I'm taking all of your work with me and now you can go relax on the couch. Like, no, that's your work, but I'm going to help you not to fail at it. Like, that's my job. And I think people forget, what does it mean to be a leader? And a leader doesn't mean I just have a fancy title. And it doesn't mean I just get, paid well to tell people what to do. No, it means I have to take all the pain and anguish of what I've had and then figure out, how do I scale that back to all the people and teams I'm working with. Like you said, it's to grow a garden. I'm trying to feed key pieces of information to a lot of different people in different ways and motivate them and make sure we're doing the right things, whether it's communication or getting them excited or building high performing teams or like anything, right? And at the end of the day, we deliver better because everybody's excited. You've built a good culture, I guess is the way I would think of it, right? Part of a job of that leader is to build a really good culture. And then you don't have to work as hard. You don't get pulled out onto those silly things like you said. You're able to focus on the right things.
Yeah. One of my favorite leaders that I've ever worked with early on in my career, I had been promoted a number of times and probably promoted a little faster than my skill set would have allowed. But he sat me down one day and he's like, look, I'm going to give you enough rope to hang yourself with. And when I see you and you're just about to pass out, that's when I'm going to come in and help. But I need you to feel the pain of the decisions you're making and, the direction in which you want to go. And I'm only going to come in at the very last second to save you. And that really did a couple of things. One, it made me own the decisions in which I was making, and that level of ownership is really valuable because when people are a part of something and they feel like they own the outcome and the process, and it's, I also say to a lot of leaders, like, you hire people to have them tell you what to do, not the other way around. And that level of ownership gives people the ability to work autonomously and to solve the problem and to make it easier on you. And, I know we've kind of beat this thing to death at this point, but that to me is the real art of leadership. Understanding the problems, finding the right people that can be there to fill in that gap, and trusting them to do the job until they just about pass out. Then you come in and help.
Yeah, from being a leader standpoint, and we should maybe do another one on that, because I think a lot of that's important, because I think that gets lost. Again, even leadership in an organization, there's people try to have classes on it, but there's no real class. You have to learn from pain.
That's right.
We've all gone through pain of anguish. We only remember things that hurt.
Yeah.
Right. But if we step back and we kind of close up here a bit, I think the takeaways I think were most important here is, one, larger projects of a certain size need to start thinking about having a true leadership team that thinks about running this more like it's their own startup and not so much like it's just another piece of work. Organizations need to look at that team as owning that as a startup almost, and not give them 20 projects to be managing, because at that point they're ineffective, right? And the mindset of that team has to be lead it as a business, not as a project. They need to take full ownership of those outcomes, which then means they have to have time to do that. But it means they need to define scope, keep everyone aligned, and make sure that everyone's well informed, status and that stuff. We're managing risks, like at a high level. Is everything moving in the direction? Is everybody on the same page, right? Like, I think that's important. Just like we say 100 times and every book says, is make sure that we're making people successful. So are we figuring out how to make sure, like you just said, every person and every team is going to be successful? Maybe that's mentoring and coaching. Maybe that's moving certain teams out and moving new teams in because it's the wrong team or the wrong person. Like, these things have to happen. And then I think the last thing is make sure that the project engineering side, right, the science of this is in place. All those practices that have to be there are there. Then being smart enough to say when it's too much. So when is enough, because it's easy to put too much in place. And then continue to remember that no matter what, leadership is required on top of that. So you have to lead and inspire. So that's what I got.
Love it. Like, I think love it. I mean, I think that's, if everybody took a little bit of that advice, I think we would all might be a little bit happier.
We'll get from 20% success to maybe 30%.
Maybe. Like, and all that success all comes down to leadership, and, be the reason people want to work for you. And, like that to me is it. And, but yeah, this has been great, man. It's, for everybody out there, if you're still listening at this point, thank you so much for being on the journey with us. I know we've been a little light here recently, but we're doubling down on our efforts to get back to the weekly cadence. So, thanks everybody for joining. Thanks everybody for the feedback. It's so nice to get to run into some of you like in real life. And, for the folks that I have run into and you've made very kind comments. Thank you all for listening. And until next time, man, this has been great.
Yes, it's been really good. And I agree with you. It's really nice to get feedback from people so we can continue to adjust the show and marry up to the audience, and also us trying to figure out where's our 5 minutes to record this. So it's been good.
Good times, man. Till next time.
All right, man. Cheers.
Cheers.